When I walked into the airport, I felt all eyes focusing on me, on my clothing, my movements, my hijab, but never in my eyes. In fact, throughout my experience, I don't recall ever being looked in the eyes. There's something very human about eye contact. Perhaps it's because, as humans, we all have eyes, and the idea that I, a perceived Muslim, would be humanized enough to receive this form of decency would be uncommon and radical. But here's the thing, I'm not Muslim. In the fall of my junior year, I was assigned by my English teacher to experience something that I wouldn't have experienced if it weren't for this assignment. I immediately arrived at the conclusion that I would like to put myself in the shoes of my Muslim peers. So that week, I went to the Muslim Student Association club meeting, and I told them about my idea to wear a hijab for this assignment. A hijab being the head covering that some Muslim women choose to wear on the basis of their religion to express their modesty. The members were excited for me. However, the Muslim members were fearful. They told me to make sure that my safety was top priority and not to go anywhere alone. Of course, as a queer person, as a Mexican American, and as a woman, I understood where they were coming from. After I received the input of my Muslim peers and MSA, I decided to proceed with my idea. Fortunately, one of my teachers who wears a hijab was kind enough to allow me to borrow 2 of hers, and she taught me how to tie them. I then asked her to list some places in our community where she feels that she has experienced Islamophobia on the basis of her appearance, so that I too could go to these places while wearing the hijab and put myself in her shoes. She listed several places, to which I narrowed down to a coffee shop, a shopping mall, a grocery store, an airport, and school. So pretty much everywhere that most of us would go on a daily basis, my teacher felt that she had been othered. This is what xenophobia looks like today. Xenophobia is an all-inclusive term referring to the phobia of the other. What the other looks like in your life varies because, of course, none of us are the same. It could be a gay man, a woman of color, a Muslim person, essentially anyone who's different from you. We live in a time when diversity in all its forms is demanding to be acknowledged. Diversity in origin, appearance, thoughts, beliefs, and opinions. And in my school, I have worked extensively to promote this idea of inclusivity and diversity within the student body and overall school environment. I've noticed that students will often close their minds and hearts to the conversation when the word diversity is mentioned. This is because naturally, it makes us uncomfortable to try to understand or associate with the other in a way that would take us out of our own perspective and experience. Which is valid because no matter who you are, your experience and your perspective matters. However, today, I would like to argue that the other's perspective and experience matters just as much. Take me, for example. The first time I was sexually harassed was in 6th grade. It was the first year of middle school for me, and I was focused on acing my social studies quiz while the boys in my gym class were placing bets on who would come and run up behind me and grab me, non-consensually and inappropriately. One of them ended up doing it, and 11-year-old me had no idea how to react. Those boys have probably forgotten that this ever happened, but I will never forget. This was the beginning of the sexualization of my body, and to this day, I can't walk on the sidewalk alone. Cars will honk, people will catcall, whistle, howl, and for the longest time, I blamed myself for their actions. As for my queer identity, I'm very open about who I am, which means I get questioned and confronted about my sexuality every single day. I have been messaged on social media about the, quote, sinful and disgusting, quote, nature of being LGBT. I've been told that I'm abnormal, an abomination, that my sexuality is a phase, and a number of times by heterosexual boys that my sexuality is hot and it turns them on, as if that's the reason that I'm gay. Being of Mexican descent, if I make a mistake in class, like many students do, I've been asked by teachers if I'm incapable of completing simple tasks because the directions weren't written or the lesson wasn't taught in Spanish. I've been called a beaner, and I can't even recall how many times I've been told that I'm going to get deported. I wouldn't consider myself to have a particularly dark skin tone. I often even carry the privilege of passing with a lighter skin tone. And if these are the comments that I receive, I can't imagine what darker Latinx people are subject to. Of course, the way that I experience xenophobia would be completely different from that of the other in my life. Based on the various stereotypes assigned to any given culture and identity, we experience and inflict othering in different ways. I have a friend who shared an experience he had with Islamophobia, being called a terrorist by somebody who he considered to be a close friend of his. There's no experiment I could conduct that would allow me to feel what he felt in that moment. I removed my hijab after my 2-week experiment, but I would like to acknowledge that there are so many people in this country who do not have the luxury of removing themselves from anti-Muslim hostility. When I wore the hijab, I was subject to xenophobia in ways that I never would have experienced in my own life. As I mentioned, I noticed that people were watching my movements, and I received a lack of eye contact in every setting. I speak from the perspective of a student, but the reality is that xenophobia affects each and every one of us, no matter what we look like, who we are, or where we spend our daily lives. Think about your workplace, your school, your friend group, your place of worship, or even your family. Now think about that one person in the group who is completely different from you or anyone else you've ever associated with before. Ask yourself these questions. Have I made an effort to understand them, befriend them, have a conversation with them? Or do I go out of my way to avoid them? Do I struggle with taking them seriously in positions of power? Have I discounted the possibility of becoming friends with them or even talking to them? Ultimately, it isn't abnormal for us to desire familiarity over something or someone completely new and different. I actually sent out a survey to the entire upper school at my high school, the Miami Valley School, asking the students their input on the work that our diversity club does and if they have any suggestions on how we could improve. And one student responded by saying that we need to stop making people uncomfortable by showing cultural videos. You see, this is when that familiarity becomes a problem. If you take away one thing from my talk today, take away this. Being uncomfortable is one of the most important parts to becoming a more empathetic and inclusive society. If you're not uncomfortable, then you're not learning. Learning does not mean that you will automatically agree with everything the other does and says. It simply means that you are one step closer to understanding, and that makes you a crucial piece to the larger puzzle that needs to be formed. Because xenophobia manifests itself in environments where we do not allow each other room to learn and in turn understand. I may be one of the others in your life. Or maybe you're 17 too. Maybe you struggle with pre-calculus class just like I do, and maybe you can relate to some of my experiences. Maybe we can find more things that we have in common than differences. Regardless, we need to do better for each other, because the other is in all of us. Our families, our friends, our communities and neighbors, our students and teachers, and even within our own identities. I was very vulnerable with you today. Most of those stories I've never shared with anyone, not even my family or my closest friends. And the most beautiful thing is that you can choose to be vulnerable and have these conversations. And when you do, listen more than you talk. Ask questions and make eye contact. Thank you.